So today, our purpose, our session, and if you don't have the chat open, this would be a good time to do it, is to, and I don't think we need slides quite yet, Nancy. If you
Okay,
don't,
sorry.
if you want to let them go, that's okay. But our purpose today is to explore, this is basically meant to be a working session. So we're going to explore hybrid workplace policies and, sort of look at what would our recommendations be based on what we're seeing in the organizations we live in, we work with, and help, the universe get a little bit more prescriptive than, hey, hybrid means some people are not in the office at the same time, right? Like, okay, got that part. Today, our guides, I'm Elise Keith. I'm the founder and CEO of Lucid Meetings and the host at the Meeting Innovation Community. And I'm joined by Nancy Settle Murphy. Nancy, say hi.
Hello, everyone. Great to see you. Hello from Boston.
So we're thrilled you could join us. For those of you who are accustomed to our events, first thing first, we like feedback. Every event that we host is an experiment, so please go ahead and open the feedback link now so that you remember to give feedback. I know at some point you'll have to leave and you'll be on to the next thing, so that will be open for you, and you can make sure you leave feedback before you forget. And then while you are playing with links, if you are interested in following along with our slides and our agenda and all of the things, all of the links, and we'll share again when they become important, so you don't have to click any of that. But here are some of the slides, the presentation information. Oh, looks like I gave it to you twice. The group map we'll be using later, and some books we'll be referencing as well. So an abundance of resources right out of the gate. Our plan today, welcome Elizabeth, welcome Steve, is to go through the conversation in this order. So first, welcome and goals. That's where we're at. You are here. Then we'll work together to create a collaboration map. So we're going to look at what is it that we need to do as teams that then informs what kind of policies we need to enable that work. Mm-hmm. Then we'll look through some examples. So both Nancy and I have worked with clients and heard all kinds of things from clients, which are kind of fascinating, and we would love your input and learn to hear also what you've been hearing. We'll work together to outline what are the decisions that need to be made when you go to set a functional hybrid policy, work through some scenarios, and wrap it up. Let's start by making sure we know who's in the room and what expertise, perspective, questions, curiosities we bring to this conversation. So we'd love for you to hop into a quick conversation with a couple of other people. And in that conversation, we're going to ask you to share a couple of things. We want you to share your name and your relationship to this particular challenge. You'll have 4 minutes and you'll be mostly in groups of 2 or 3. Any questions about what's about to happen? So quick little breakout, share your name and your relationship with the hybrid workplace policy challenge. Okay. All right, let's go figure out who's here. Hey, everybody, welcome back. What did you learn from each other? Just a couple. I would love to hear from 2 people about something that you heard that you found fascinating. And if there's nothing fascinating, we'll just move on.
The time was too short to, talk about all the fascinating stuff. You need to give us a few more minutes.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Steve?
Yeah, just one of our participants, Mai, was talking about the public sector, and it seemed to me that they were beginning to ask the right questions and challenging their assumptions about what the next phase is that we're working into. So I'm delighted that people are asking and recognize the assumptions they're making.
Very cool. Very cool. So on that front, let's start diving in to some of the assumptions and what is going on with this world of workplace policy. All right, Nancy, I think we're ready now. And Nancy, let me know if you don't want to be in breakouts next time. I missed on that. Was that good?
I loved being in that breakout. I learned so much from Elizabeth. Honestly, it was a whole different take on what I'm seeing.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Okay, so on the front of hybrid workplace policies. So go ahead, next slide. We're going to start by making a collaboration map, because when you talk about hybrid work, one of the people that I love to look at is Gustavo Rossetti. I was telling Nancy before this, and if you want to go to the next slide, there's a quote here from Gustavo. He is the leader at Fearless Culture, and he's written several books on this. He does a lot of culture mapping for organizations. And one of the things he recognized is that when people talk about hybrid work, they're often talking about where people's personal preferences are about where they work. Or if you're one of the big tech companies, you're talking about what can we sell you that will make hybrid work better for you. Mm-hmm. But it's a vastly more complex, complicated conversation than that. That instead, rather than looking at what we'd prefer to do or how we do it technically, he suggests that what we need to start with is why we're collaborating in the first place. Mm-hmm. So if you go to the next slide, he's broken that up and says, there are really 6 different modes of working for distributed teams. Sometimes we need to work together. He calls that we time. And some of the things we need to do when we work together are deep. They really require us to be as present as possible, fully engaged with one another. Can somebody think of an example of what in your world would qualify as deep collaboration?
Yeah, co-creating a class or co-creating some difficult, complex deliverable.
Right on, right? Like just, actually working through all these kinds of details together. His next level, shallow collaboration, right? An example?
I'll keep talking if nobody else wants to. I'm warning you now.
Oh, voices.
I don't dislike silence, but if everyone's timid but me, I will just dominate the call. I'm just warning you now. That's a threat. Come on, Marta. You want to speak up. Vicky's running away. Teasing you. That's a tease.
So let's assume that shallow collaboration is that we're working together in real time is something like project updates, right? We
planning, tweaking the agenda of some shared meeting that doesn't change that much.
Right on. And as you can see on this slide, he outlines 4 more. So on the me time things I'm doing by myself, focus work, individual things, learning, what he calls regular collaboration. Regular collaboration? Well, I'm not entirely sure exactly what that is, but we get an opportunity to explore that. And then just not working, how about sometimes? So if you go to the next slide, what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at it in a slightly simpler frame. We're going to look at together when we are collaborating in a hybrid workplace, in your workplace, with the clients you work with, what are the things that you can be done or should be done together at the same time and in the same place? What are the things you need to be doing at the same time, but you can do from anywhere? What are things you need? You can read. I'm not going to read this to you. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to do it in group maps. So I have a group map set up for us, and I'm going to pop this into the chat again. And go ahead and open that up. And when you arrive, it will look like this. And we're going to click in here to what tasks do your teams need to do. Here you come. Look at all the people showing up. Yay. And here we've got 4 minutes. We're just going to take 4 minutes and start adding some of these ideas, because as we talk about policy, our policy needs to serve the collaboration, right? Our policies need to enable us to collaborate in the ways we need to collaborate. So let's take 4 minutes and start exploring some of what that might mean. So I found some of these kind of difficult. Anybody else have run into that? You want to talk about that one? I saw some head nods. Marta?
Yeah, I think I find difficult to not say whatever at the same place and different times. So, but afterwards I saw, well, what's specifically for the same place. So if you're sharing this, that you cannot have two people at the same time there. So that's the only thing that I imagine that you can have at the same place and different times. But and also some things like strategic planning. I don't see that everybody has to be there. I think everybody can be online to make a strategic planning meeting. So can work either ways.
Yeah, so who else noticed something in a quadrant where they would have put it in a different one, right on, or where they'd have see it in both places?
Well, I think all bets are off, given that we might have all done a lot of these things in the last 2 years. It proves that in any conventional thinking we had about where and how and what was to be done face to face was just blown out of the water. So, any of them, it's completely random to me. And I think all those things could be done, if you need to, in a combination of all 4 quadrants, not specifically in one.
Yeah, I agree. It depends on the team, what you're doing. What is the work that needs to be accomplished? It all depends. Each of these quadrants could be moved around depending on what you're actually doing. If it's something to do with customer service, obviously, and that you need to actually do in person, or that team focuses on that, then it needs to be in one quadrant. Whereas if it's, a team that does, I don't know, something in the financial sector where you don't really need to see each other, even the onboarding can be done, online. So it all depends.
Thank you, Steph. When you look at this chart, it was a lot easier when we were all in the same building. We didn't have to think or plan about how we would conduct activities specifically remote versus in person, because we were just there, right? I mean, how much of a lift that was for your engagement with work. It was just kind of all there. You just drop into a room with somebody, or you get in the conference room, or you work in the lab, or however that works. And that's just remarkable how different the world has changed and what possibilities it might open up for doing things differently if we think about them.
Yeah, I think to John's point, it's about you have to just be more thoughtful about planning when you're not in the same place. You can't be as spontaneous just to chat with a colleague, or to something comes up and you deal with it there and then. You have to pre-arrange or jump on a call. So most things could be done not in the same place, but you just have to plan and just be done differently. Same time, I think that's different. Not everything. Certain things you have to be doing at the same time.
Yeah.
And I just want to add, build on what Steve said before. We've been doing all of this in the last 2 years, so we know it can be done all virtually. But I think that the important question for organizations is, for our organization or our project team, or even right now where we are in this project, this phase, what can be done best this way or that way versus, yes, arguably any of these can be done virtually. We've proven it. But for our organization and our work for our team, what's best done in person? I think that's what a lot of organizations are kind of struggling with, because yeah, it can all be done virtually, but what's best when we're together?
Marta?
I find the interesting question, not either if you do it in person or you do it virtually, but doing hybrid, it makes it much more complicated. So many things are easier if you do it either one way or the other way. But I notice now that we're going back to the office, I notice I'm disturbed by my colleagues talking on the phone, which I wasn't when I was at home. And I'm distracted by that. And I think, what do I do? Should I listen to music, listen to something? So it's also the question, what cannot be done that well now that we're back to office and everybody goes, is there.
Well, and I notice on this map, there's like basically one thing that literally you can't do apart. Like there are some things that we did in the past that we had forgotten to do, like, sharing coffee, or taking a walk together. You can kind of take a walk together, but not really.
Mm-hmm.
Not really. You can't go together and say, look at that duck. Oh my gosh, together. So there are some things that aren't possible remotely. So what does this mean though? Because I think John brought up an important point about cognitive load, right? So when we were all in the office, you just didn't have to think so hard. And a lot of what's happening with organizations working to create hybrid workplace policies is they're looking to say, here's how it's going to work so we don't have to think so hard. Right? These are the rules. This is what we're going to do. That's that. Let's go for it, so that we can stop having the conversation all the time. Because that's a huge burden. It's a huge load to try and figure out all this stuff every single time. So we thought now we look at some of the policies that Nancy and I have encountered and where they kind of fall on a couple of spectrums, and then also hear your stories as we talk through what we're seeing, and then we'll move into outlining some of the options together. So you can agree or disagree with these axes. Feel free to comment on them, but we see the policies sort of fall along a couple of ranges. One is this sort of tension between controlling what everybody does and giving control to individual employees to make their own decisions. And another tension is between the fear that if we don't do something or do something, it will have these scary negative consequences on the business. And then faith, right? If we enable, allow, make this possible, won't that be wonderful and liberating? So one of the first policies that we've both seen in action is that basically the organization says we're going to be hybrid, and every team needs to figure it out for themselves, set their own policies at the team level. Is anybody else encountering that particular variation? I saw a nod. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Nancy, I think you know this one, right? Talk about that one.
Yes. One of my, actually a friend who works at a big worldwide government agency based in Manhattan, they have said everyone has to be in the office, and this is in Manhattan, Tuesday and Friday, which means everyone has to be there Friday. And yeah, that's one I've never heard. Often I hear, you can pick, you've got to be in Tuesday or Wednesday and Thursday, but any other days you can choose. But that's the only case so far I've heard. Everyone's going to be in on Friday.
And if I remember correctly, Nancy, it was because on Friday, they wanted everybody to be on Friday because if they didn't come in on Friday, they were afraid they wouldn't be working.
Exactly. They're off going away for the weekend, especially during that warm weather months.
All right. So what else have we got?
Whoops.
So I work with a company that instead of having everybody come in on Fridays as their requirement, has what they've called mandatory thankful Fridays. And at least one Friday a month, and sometimes two, they just shut the office down. Everybody's off. So it's not a 4-day work week policy specifically. It's a, sometimes we have 4-day work weeks. And because they're clever like that, they try and arrange thankful Fridays right before holiday Mondays. So.
A quick question, are they shutting the office down for work or everybody gets a day off, or is everybody expected to work from home on that Friday?
They get a day off mostly. But they also, they do manufacture actual physical goods, and they do have sales. So it's one of those policies that sounds like a big blanket awesome policy at the top, but actually means each team needs to negotiate who still, keeps the lights on.
So it's probably a part of that organization thinks it's not fair.
Well, the part of the organization that still has to keep the lights on rotates that responsibility. So on the one hand, they recognize that other people always get it off, but on the other hand, they do get some Fridays off that they never had before, and they recognize that their jobs are, dependent on actually doing the work. So it's one of those things. Yeah.
I think there's variations of that. I mean, we did something where rather than, it's not the full day, but we'll have a video free or meeting free day. So just for that break. So people try not to have meetings on a Friday, or don't have their video on at all on a Thursday, and so it just gives them a break.
Nice.
I've heard of a number of experiences where companies have used this transition to go for a 4-day week.
Mm-hmm.
And so nobody works on the Friday. And what they did, this was a manufacturing company as well, and they went and talked to all their customers and found their customers generally very supportive of the fact that they couldn't phone up an order on a Friday. So they adjusted their schedules and so on. And one of the impacts that was not immediately obvious was that staff used Friday for their kind of life admin, doctor's appointments and trips to schools, and kind of packed all that stuff that might have been littered throughout the week previously that would have interrupted their work pattern. It's all now on the Friday. So it's really clear, and productivity and efficiency hasn't dipped at all. So I think that may be a growing trend. I think that's absolutely what people might start doing.
That's a very cool example.
My sort of counter experience with that was the no Fridays became we talked how to get used to them as that's my extra day for me. I'm not going to fill that with appointments to go see people and have appointments during the week and keep my 3-day weekends. But we all adapt in our own ways.
Yeah, indeed.
And it's very industry and job specific, right? You can't do that for every industry or every job. It really just depends on the industry and the job that you're working in, whether that can work for your business or not.
I think that's the case for sure, because certainly with a multinational company, somebody's Friday is another person's Thursday. So you get a lot of around the clock issues. Elizabeth?
Yeah, no, I just was saying each team is still made up of individuals, and each individual works different, thrives different, sees things different. Some of them are really good at working online. They love to work from home. They can pretty much do everything from home. whereas for others it doesn't work. Yes, it all looks really good stepping back and looking down from the top, holistically speaking. But if you look at each individual then and how they work, because everybody is different, I think then it gets a lot more complicated.
Well, speaking of more complicated, another set of policies that we have seen is that everybody picks, right? Which I put under the fear category, because it tends to be couched as if we don't allow everybody to make all of their own choices at all the time, they'll get upset and they'll leave. Which basically means the cognitive load we talked about before. Everybody has to decide and coordinate at all times.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of this, and one company that the employees decided on their own, they all are going to come in every Wednesday because they want to see each other, because the company hasn't declared any policy and has left it up to them. So I've seen actually a couple of my clients where the employees have gotten together and said, here's what we're going to do absent any policy, because they wanted some reliable time where they could all be together.
Which means to me that they were looking for some leadership in the company and they stepped into that role.
Absolutely. Yes. A lot of leaders haven't made any decision for sure yet.
Yeah.
So
I feel like you were framing that as abdication. I don't think that's fair necessarily. I mean, maybe it's just like, you guys are big enough and smart enough to figure this out for yourselves, and there's no corporate need to dictate a policy. Sort yourselves out. And that feels scary, maybe, but maybe it's deliberate in some cases.
Yeah, it may not be.
Yeah, that interestingly, Thomas, a similar example is where companies decided to have self-leveling holidays. So that they said, okay, take as much time off as you want and decide on your own holiday process. The obvious thing that people do is look to their immediate superior and to see how long they take off, and therefore it settles out into what's reasonable. But there are a number of companies now that have a kind of no holiday policy, therefore you take time off when you need it.
So in terms of other enabling policies, the ability in the office, not necessarily to determine if you've got the team determining when they come in, how do they then reserve desks, not just for myself, but the entire team so we can sit together, that enabling infrastructure and policies. Requiring 2 days in the office and you pick. How many people have seen that one? That one seems really popular.
Oh, often. 2 or 3 I'm seeing.
I don't quite understand that one. I don't quite understand how that works with the bit where we talk about there's things you should do together and things that you don't. So therefore randomly pick when you're coming into the office. I don't get this one.
Doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
When I push people on that policy, they start talking about the need to justify the office space they're renting in the center of a city. So it's a very different argument, and it's a justification. Well, we need people to come in, otherwise we don't need these offices. So you say, well, let's look at that policy rather than forcing people to use a space just to justify that you can spend money on it. There's a cost saving there as well.
Well, and on the required 2 days in the office, you pick. One of the other things that I'm hearing from clients is, okay, we're going to go do this policy now, but some of our people have moved away during the pandemic. And some of them don't want to come in at all. So what do we do with that? Which, given that it's 2 random days, raises some real questions about what the rules might be. And then, given that these policies are kind of new and they're running into those questions, policy's good for 3 months and then we'll see. So Nancy, talk about that one.
Yeah, I've been working with a company here in the Boston area, and we met again last week with 20 supervisors who were there to fine tune, finalize, give feedback on the new long-term hybrid work policy. And at the very end of this meeting, and I thought, I've been working with them for months. They finally nailed it. They said, well, this is still just an experiment. And all the supervisors said, well, how are we going to recruit people if this is an experiment? So, yeah, I think I'm seeing that too, as well. This is long-term for now, and let's see how we do. And to Steve's point before, never mind that we were able to do our work completely virtually the last 3 years. We're pretty sure we can do this too, but no, we want you to now set some new performance metrics that were never needed before. So I'm seeing a lot of this. It's provisional.
So with that, I think given that we've talked about this range of options, underneath these options, there are a whole bunch of decisions that need to be made. So let's start outlining some of those decisions together. And we're going to break into smaller groups so that we can talk and work together at once, again, in Group Map. So I pop in the link in here and I'll just show you what it looks like. So for every organization that's adopting a hybrid workplace policy, there are a number of things they have to figure out. Right? So first of all, like Nancy had this great example, definitions. You know, what is an office? If you say people have to be in an office, for people that've got branches in multiple locations, decisions around when you work, where employees live, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let's take some time and outline these together. Again, the link to Group Map is in the chat. We're going to work in groups of 3 or 4 for about 8 minutes.
And we're all going to populate the same shared space.
Yep,
from
exactly.
Our different little silo rooms. Okay.
That's right. So you'll be able to see what everybody's doing. It just makes it a little easier to chat about what you're seeing when you don't have to talk over the top of everybody else. Any questions about what's about to happen? Okay, go have fun. Welcome back. I see a ton of stuff on there.
Great discussion.
You want to share?
Do I want to share?
Does somebody want to share? Talk a little bit about the discussion you had.
One thing we were talking about at the end, because we had a lot of ideas. One was about, and I see someone else had that too, depending how you define the office, that has implications perhaps for insurance, liability, workers' comp, et cetera. And then another we were just talking about at the end was some companies are actually paying remote workers more because they don't have to have real estate in the office for them. And then I'm also seeing the opposite, that people who commute are getting paid more because they come into the office and they have expenses the remote people don't. So that was just a tail end issue. I'm seeing that all across the board, all different variations.
Who else came up with had some interesting conversations they'd like to share?
If you write out, if you run your own business, you can write off the portion of your home that's used for your home office as part of your tax deduction. But if you're an employee, you don't get to write off that portion of your home, but your portion of your home is now dedicated to the business. So there's a liability side, but there's also a compensation side to consideration for long-term use of somebody's own home space for the business, effectively. That's probably needs to be factored into the conversation as an extension of the office.
In addition to that, John, we talked a lot about security as well. In addition to liability, security of data and equipment. Often when we were all working in the office, we probably had employees sign some agreement for their laptop and about where they're using it. Well, now that's much more risky depending on what data you have and where you're located or where you're doing that work and what that work is. So that was something that security of both equipment and the data is definitely a big factor.
It's a big deal for everybody now. And it always was. It's just now more apparent.
Yeah, I think we picked up on that as well, Vicky, and we thought that actually, if you thought about it, it didn't take that long for people to adapt. So the IT security people to put the right protocols in place. And I just random thought, I wonder the reported thefts of laptops. I wonder if that's gone up or down, because without people traveling, you know, maybe they weren't losing quite so many corporate laptops.
No.
Yeah, no good. Yeah, it'd be a good statistic to know, right?
Yeah.
Michelle, Mai, I don't think we've heard from you recently. Would either of you like to, Stacy, would you like to share?
I actually work in an interesting environment because it's a California State University system. So we've got unionized employees and those that aren't. And then we don't have the resources to reimburse folks for their workspaces at home, or to minimize the amount of parking that they're paying for and things like that. So those are the things we're struggling with right now, actually, as we're defining the policy. So it's been an interesting conversation, because the private sector has a much different ability, I think, to implement some things than we might have just from a budgetary perspective.
Yeah, I agree with Stacy. I work for the public sector too. And so we kind of run into a lot of the whole budget issue, not having the ability to reimburse people for commuting, for equipment, for parking. And then we also run into a lot of equity issue where we have, I mean, we are a public service agency, but we also, you know, there's that whole unfairness that comes into, oh, why do certain people get to work remotely, but then everybody else has to come into work every day? And it's hard to say, well, you work in a public service, you know, job, but it's very difficult to kind of find that balance and then be able to be equitable in that sense, that everybody gets the same treatment. So that's kind of a lot of it that we're facing in our work environment. Yeah.
Michelle?
Yeah, we spent a lot of time talking about technology and security. My other group members already spoke about, so really nothing to add at this point.
Okay. Thank you. So I think, Mai, what you were talking about really does get back to definitions, doesn't it? Like, if the definitions are incredibly clear about why certain roles need to be in the office and why they don't, what kind of work happens in what place. It's a level of policy setting that I haven't seen reflected well in the market yet.
Just a curious little anecdote. The central government of the UK have spent the last 20 years trying to decentralize civil servant jobs from London, which of course is incredibly expensive, and people have long commutes and can't afford to live where they work and so on. And they recently announced a back to work policy, and that mere phrase caused an enormous amount of backlash, because what do you mean we weren't working? And the unions have gone back to the government and said, hang on a minute, our contracts specifically don't say a single place of work, because you've been stripping it out over the last 20 years. So therefore, that's not a policy that you can insist on. So there's a really curious debate going on at the moment about whether that means people should and can work from where they want to, because nobody, if you suddenly give somebody who's been commuting for 20 years an hour and a half a day each way, the freedom and the space back in their life where they haven't had to do that, they certainly don't want to go back to getting up at 6 a.m. and jumping on a train and traveling into London every day.
Right.
Shot themselves in the foot.
Well, I think it also depends on if you're calling in from the UK.
Yeah.
I think the work environment or the laws in the US as compared to the UK are very different. If a worker in the US doesn't want to come to work anymore, there's no reason for the employer not to say, well, you don't have to come here at all anymore, and they can let him go, no questions asked, where I think it's very different in the UK. where you're pretty much guaranteed your employment unless you strangle somebody, in front of everybody else. But, so it's going to be different from an employer's perspective, from the US or the UK or anywhere in Europe where the laws are very different.
Yeah, no, it is. I'm in Canada, actually, although the accent doesn't sound like it. I'm not
I am calling from Canada, but I grew up, I lived a long time in,
obviously,
in Europe.
Yeah, Canada's very different as well, and the laws, so it does depend on where you're located, and the the legalities as well are very different.
So fabulous conversation. Let's see if we can do some work to focus it down. We're going to run through two basically 10-minute experiments looking at different scenarios. And I know some of you have to step away or be less active here at the top of the hour. Thanks for letting us know. So we have two specific scenarios to look at. And as we listen to these scenarios, we're going to ask ourselves these three questions. What will be the most important policies for them to decide and clarify first in this situation? Right? Given this huge range of things that we've talked about, what do they need to tackle first? What are some policies in these situations that you believe everyone could live with? And where are the traps? So we are putting on our consulting advising hats for these organizations. All right.
So these are actually two somewhat disguised clients of mine. So the first, with two very different situations. The first is a US-based headquarters of a medical device manufacturer, and that happens to be in Massachusetts. The headquarters is in France, but 250 people work in this headquarters building in Massachusetts. So before COVID, except for the manufacturing folks, but pretty much everyone in the corporate office worked in the office full time. There might have been a handful exceptions for teleworkers, but that was mainly so that they could bring on some engineers that were super valuable that didn't live around there. But then during COVID, like so many companies, they flipped the switch and everyone went to work at home. Again, mostly the knowledge workers. So today, senior leaders who are both in France and the US, so it's a split leadership team, they want everyone back in the office someday. They haven't said exactly when. They have, however, I'd say about 3 months ago, they implemented a policy that everyone has to work on site at least 2 days a week. You pick the day, but everyone's got to come back. And the supervisors have to agree. Now, over corporate headquarters in France, everyone has to return to the office by September 1st, with most on-site 3 days a week right now. So today, they're about 3 days a week. In September, in France, they all have to go back to the office. So that's where this company is right now. And a lot of the people at headquarters in Massachusetts are pushing back, but they right now are required and they pretty much are working there 2 days a week. So that's the situation for this first one. So the questions, well, the first question, what do you think will be most important for this company, these senior leaders, to decide and clarify first? I'd say, and I'll say for the US folks as well as the folks in France, and there are other locations too, by the way, but the two biggest are Massachusetts and France. So what's the most important thing for this company to decide and clarify? And this is for maybe someone who hasn't spoken yet, or it can be anyone.
I would just like to clarify why. Why do they want everybody in the office? If I were a person being asked, I don't know, that clarity would help establish the impetus for this change. Otherwise, it feels like managers who are afraid to embrace the new reality that we seem to have entered.
Yeah, I agree, John. I think it's understanding clarifying what is the objective, what's the purpose, what's the value that they're getting from people returning to the office. Why do they want people back?
And just to add to that, why 2 days? Why, what is magical or important about 2 days? But that's what they set. And I think they set that back in November.
I think maybe they did the 2 days because they didn't want to jump in full tilt and say everybody needs to go back to work. So they're testing the waters. Give it 2 days, it doesn't matter when, just to get used to the work environment again, I would assume, because otherwise they would, there would be a more solid reason behind it.
That's a good point. And so Steve asked a question, if the French office are saying it's a good thing for everyone to return, why are they giving people 4 months to adjust to the idea? Well, that's a good question, because in corporate headquarters, they've also had this policy in effect, their current policy, since I believe it was November. And so that is a good question.
And I think that's what I'm finding really difficult is the procrastination and the degree of effort people are putting into designing policies and hosting meetings and, deciding these things. Whereas you don't have to think very far back, in fact, to the 23rd of March, 2020, when we were told work from home if you can from tomorrow. And, within a couple of months, very much, most people had adjusted. And now we're going into this sort of prolonged period of procrastination to prepare for what we're going next to, without that sort of sense of innovation and experimentation that we had to adopt when we were told we can't go to the office. It's just two mindsets, and I don't understand that.
Well, I think one was forced, everybody had to stay home. They saw it coming, and the other one isn't forced. Now a decision needs to be made, and profitability might suffer, right? So they don't want to make that decision right now.
Okay, good point. But I think we all know from any change that in order for a change to work, there has to be a compelling reason for change, and there also has to be a line in the sand so that there's no way back. And so I think we're drifting into this. Oh well, we'll see, and we'll experiment, and we'll change the policy, and we'll drift into chaos, I think, rather than being definitive about it or just experimenting and let people go with the flow, do what they want to do. And then if productivity lapses, or if you're finding people are only working 2.5 days a week, then there's a different conversation to have.
So Steve, are you suggesting one of the policies they should make first be a harder deadline?
Yeah, not give people 4 months. I mean, if it's that, if it's going to work, if you think that's the way to run the business, then do it tomorrow. Don't, give people 4 months to worry about it and think, oh, what does this mean to me? And how do I adjust? And, it's too much procrastination.
It makes me laugh because we went through the whole of COVID, right? And during that time, all these changes that they made to, okay, so actually it's going to make a difference in 3 weeks or on this day in the future, we're going to stop wearing masks, or we're going to stop doing this, or we're going to do something different. Not tomorrow, because obviously, it's going to make a difference waiting and doing it in 3 weeks' time, rather than just saying to people, okay, we've made this decision, let's do it now. What I don't understand that, I just never understood, and I really don't understand that time thing. If you've made a decision, you've made a decision for a reason, do it immediately.
Well, I just want to say, at least one of my clients has made a decision. This is a different one than this one. But they're giving they gave 2 months notice, so that people who have to arrange childcare differently or care for their parents, or they've been living on one car because they didn't need another car, now they have to procure a car, which, depending where you live, can be pretty tough. So they wanted to give them a heads up so that people could arrange their personal lives differently, because this has a huge impact for a lot of people. For some, not at all, but for some, they have to do a lot of juggling to make this work.
That's fair, but I think there's no reason why the policy can't go into effect immediately. And if people are not able, like individually, because that's not the case for everybody.
That's
if
true.
individually people have those challenges, they should discuss that with the manager and say, okay, well, as of this day, I can make arrangements, but it doesn't mean that the policy should have to wait.
That's a nice clarification.
Yeah, I think that's a good one.
So I heard that they, in terms of being important and recommendations in this situation, number one, get extra exquisitely clear on why this matters. And Thomas pointed out, we started with that, right? There are certain tasks that you need to do together in theory, and others that you don't. So being crystal clear up front about the why. And number two, get off the pod, right? Implement the policy, and with a grace period for those people who need accommodations. Was there anything else that you would recommend as a something that should happen for this group as a first step recommendation? And then we'll look at the next one because they're different.
I just want to say one of the dragons here, to use your parlance, Elise, is you've got the headquarters in France mandating everyone back to the office by September 1st. And you've got the US headquarters. Even though they said a few months ago they want everyone back, they're really backpedaling on that because they're losing a lot of technical talent who are saying, I'm out of here. So I think it's that the difference in terms of, well, you have got one office, so it's back to the equity, I think, because everyone will be working probably the same number of hours, but it's more, how come we don't get that and they do, et cetera. So that's just another one. And that could be explained away by company policy, by country policy, but that's something I think they have to deal with. Want me to go on to the next one, Elise?
Yeah, I think you should in terms of time, but before we get into it, if you need a second, this is a good moment to wiggle because we've been at this for a bit. So I recommend a wiggle break because we are human beings, not chair monsters. Or so wiggle yourself so that you can do this last one, and we'll work through this next scenario, and then we'll formulate some takeaways to share with the universe.
Okay, and you can keep wiggling as I go through this. This is a kind of a composite of some of my clients, but it's very typical. So it's a Fortune 100 global technology company with over 50,000 people. I have worked with them. I've been working in the hybrid, we used to call it virtual before everything became all virtual, but I've been working with distributed teams and with this company for 20 years. And all along they've been distributed. And during that time before COVID, the people who worked either in the small satellite offices or the handful of who work from home, and that was rare, but the people who worked in the smaller offices felt really marginalized, felt alienated, felt like they didn't have an opportunity for promotion. They weren't close to the power base, a lot of proximity bias at play. So they felt they never really could have the same career growth as others at headquarters, which happens to be in New York. So then COVID hit. And again, all their knowledge workers were sent home to work. And what happened was the people who once felt marginalized were so happy that now people understood what they were going through. They were struggling with what these folks have been struggling with for years in terms of working from home or working from different places, not having access to the boss's ear, et cetera. And so they felt, finally, we're working at parity. Finally, we're at a level playing field with everyone. No one has an advantage anymore. Now they're going back to hybrid, back to hybrid because they were hybrid before. So their hybrid may take a different form, probably will from before COVID, but they are going back to essentially the same work model that they once had. So the remote folks, and some of the leaders are concerned about this too, but the people who are going to remain in the smaller offices while a lot of people go back to corporate headquarters, they're concerned that they're going to be left out again. So that's a very different situation. They never really, they had been hybrid all along. So the first question, let's go back to the questions. Let me see. First question, what's the most important for them to decide and clarify first?
Who should decide or clarify something? The head office?
Yeah, the head office, whoever, let's say in this case, and this is a company that's headquartered in New York City, and that's where the C-level people are generally there. There are a few scattered in other countries, but yeah, the senior leaders, what are some of the most important things for them to decide and clarify for the whole company? Well, Thomas raised a good question. Management needs to decide if they want to keep imposing the proximity bias or not.
There's a secret reason why they might not want to. And that is, as a company, they want the most access to the most talent they could possibly get, which means the fewest barriers, which means no proximity bias bad. But what if I'm, a relatively senior person, I'm gunning for a top slot. What do I not want? More competition for the top slot. If I happen to be in New York, maybe I've sacrificed to be in New York. And the value of that sacrifice got lost when we all went hybrid, but damn it, I want my advantage back.
Oh, I see. Okay, because I was looking at it from the people who were at a disadvantage, then we had an advantage, and now we're going to have a disadvantage again. But I see the opposite, or that kind of contrary view.
Yeah, you got a corporate climber who can't feel thrilled that this suddenly unexpectedly leveled playing field, which suddenly exposes that person to a lot more competition for the next promotion. It's like, can we make that go away, please?
So that sounds like a clarifying first decision, which is, do we wish to continue to enable level playing fields, right? So example, one remote, all remote is a common meeting practice for some kinds of meetings, right? Even though you happen to be in the office, you all take it from your desks and you're all the same size squares.
Just by taking away the proximity bias, and you're not necessarily creating a level playing field. You might just introducing a different kind of bias, for at different levels. Just to take one away. And yes, somebody working remotely before now has the ear of whoever is in the C-suite that's important to them. But on the other hand, something else might be taken away from somebody who, like Thomas said, who was working in the office there, sacrificing a whole bunch of resources that would have had otherwise by working remotely. So you're taking one bias away, creating a new one. Doesn't really level out anything.
Wow, that's a really profound statement. I'm going to get my head around that one, because I think that's a really good point. Because I think the example of meetings, which Elise just touched on, and that is, I will always advise design for remote first. Always imagine how remote people are going to be connected. And often I will say, have everyone participate the same way, even if they're in the office. Have everyone participate through, let's say, some meeting platform. But then that puts the people at a disadvantage who can get together, who do want to look each other eye to eye, who do want to have the small talk and the chatter, and suddenly they can't, because that isn't kind of fair, I use quotes, fair to people who are out there. So that's a really interesting point. So other policies, what's the most important for them to decide and clarify first? So we talked about proximity bias. Is there something else here?
I think, one of the things that's become clear through this conversation, if it wasn't before, is that there are no perfect answers, right? Marta mentioned that even if you can get back into the office, for some people it's really annoying because your office mates are noisy. And for some people it's a godsend because your housemates are noisy, right? So there are definitely no like magically equitable options in this equation. So one of the questions becomes, knowing that you can't achieve perfect fairness, how do you speak to that?
Well, it's that saying, isn't it? You can please some of the people all of the time and all of the people some of the time, but you can't please all of the people all of the time. You're always going to have people that aren't happy.
Yeah, and what's your critical path? And it may change.
Mm-hmm.
In a time of almost zero unemployment and a horrible war for talent, anything that serves as a barrier to recruitment or retention would have to be viewed with extreme skepticism.
And how much risk are you prepared to take? Comes back in that quadrant earlier. It's like we're afraid, right? We're afraid to do some of those things through fear of losing people or whatever those reasons are. So it's like how much we have to, what is that critical path? We have to make a decision and be prepared to accept whatever consequences are.
So for me, just based on that, therefore, above all else, we have to be authentic and transparent in the reasons for and the decisions. So I'm deeply suspicious, for example, about Google's CEO saying that everybody needs to be back in the office. And if you just look at the amount of money Google have spent in the last 2 or 3 years on office space, it is horrendous. It's astronomical. It's tens of billions across the world. Of course, they want people back in the office to justify that spend.
And you're right, Steve. The winners here is going to be the companies with the deep pockets who can attract, the most employees, because the hybrid model is great. And if people don't have to be in the office, they will go for the jobs that pay the most. Depends, what balance they want, life-work balance here. But whoever can pay the most. I'm talking about Canada here. We are losing all our, developers to the States who have much deeper pockets for things like that. So the winners are going to be the
workers.
Pardon me?
So as remote workers.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and I think Google are finding, mass resignations because their workers, the people they want, the best people that they can afford, don't want to work in an office. They want to work how they've been working for the last 2 years.
Yep.
I was looking at this, think about the scenario that Nancy put out, and we talked a little bit about the loss that the remote workers might feel, or the loss that the corporate climbers might feel, and different things. But one thing this would be to understand would be, what have they gained? Is the company prepared to embrace remote work as a gain? Because we learned some things about how we worked in the last couple of years. And it isn't just about facilitating remote work for remote work's sake, but what has changed in the way we work that says we should do this, and that we should embrace this as a competitive advantage if we need to in our company, and not view it as a backwater, adaptation.
It's almost like some companies are seeing or kind of otherizing remote work and say it's not as good as, it's not the real thing. We had to do that in this emergency, but we know we can do better if we're all face to face. So that was what we were forced to do. And I think a lot of them are trying to tell themselves that now, until and unless once they start losing people and are having a hard time recruiting new people, which I'm seeing all the time. I think that's when they've got to realize, yeah, we may not like it. One of my clients feels they're losing their family culture. And then I think, what does that even mean? And who wants a work family? I mean, some people don't want a work family, but I think there are a lot of fears associated with moving to hybrid as a permanent basis, and they're coming up with some excuses.
Right. So I think it's the difference between enduring and embracing. Enduring the hybrid thing versus embracing it for what it actually can bring. And
interesting.
So let's take a second here because we're right at the end of our time, and take 30 seconds each, kind of quietly, and summarize where you're at right now. All right. So we're gonna bottom line this one up. So based on what you've explored, based on where this conversation is landing for you at the moment, what 1 or 2 policy recommendations will you bring back to those in your world? Right. What is 1 or 2 things that you've pulled from this that you think you need to carry back to your clients, your organizations, your teams? Let's just take a minute and write these down, and then we'll share them in the chat and wrap up our official time together. And then we'll hang. We'll leave this open for anybody who would like to continue this wonderful conversation. Thank you for writing this up.
Great.
So part of the reason we ask everybody to write things down is because we share what's written, right? After, in terms of what you can expect going forward after this event, we will send the recording, we'll send all of the chat transcripts, the exports from group maps, so all of the decisions that leaders might need to face as they're making these policies. For those of you who are consultants, coaches, folks like that, you are very welcome to use this material, to write your blog post, to share on LinkedIn, to promote, to start deeper conversations with your teams beyond, hey, let's be in how many days of the week do we want to force people to be in, right? Or whatever the hybrid conversation is that's already happening in your company. We'd love feedback. And with that, like I want to say officially, want to be done with the official part of it so people can dive into that following conversation, Nancy.
Yeah, I was just building on what Steve said about the climate implications. I do a lot of unconscious bias training. And what I'm seeing is that we are really putting at a disadvantage certain people, people of color, women, people with physical and other disabilities found it in general much easier and preferable to work remotely. And now we're forcing certain people back into the office where they have really enjoyed being at parity and not having to code switch all day long, which is so mentally draining. So I think that's something for organizations to really think about as well, is that that for some it is excruciating to have to be back. It isn't, and it isn't the same for everyone. I just think they should look at this as an opportunity to create pathways for equity all across the board and not just remote versus on-site.
Does somebody have a burning question that they're still holding that they would love this group's input on? I guess one for me, I'll be selfish because I'm unmuted. I personally believe that coming together in person is amazing and is something that should happen on a quarterly basis or something like that. There should be for people who can otherwise work remotely at all times. I still believe that there's value in pulling people together for specific special occasions. I think there's great value in sharing a meal, but that would be my bias. And my question is, what is it that that if you could have your brothers, or you have that druthers, not your brothers. I don't know who your brothers are. I don't know a thing about your brothers, nor do I want to at the moment. If you could have your preferences, what would you enforce some amount of coming together, or would you always want it to always be remote?
I think there is no right or wrong here. It all depends on the individuals and how they work, what they prefer. There is no, even with an inclusive workplace, if a company just looks now at profitability and everybody works remote, it's very easy. I know we said we should embrace it to work remote, but now it is very easy to replace somebody because it really doesn't matter anymore where they work or live. You can see it from both sides. On one hand, the employee might say, well, I want to stay at home, work from home. This works for me. There's no need for me to be in the office. This is how I work best, right? Which is fine. The company, on the other hand, might say, okay, Susan, who works at home now, who always worked in the office before and everybody liked her and we wanted her there now. There's no connection personally to her anymore. And Ken in that place works for half the money. There's no reason for us anymore to keep Susan, right? So it works on both sides. You always can see it from one perspective or another perspective. And even from an individual basis, it just depends on how somebody works better or worse or what they prefer. I think it shed a light on a company and their values and how it is aligned with the rest of the companies. And if there is not a solid foundation there, then they're going to flounder from every point of view, from the C-suite down to the frontline workers. So I don't think there is a right or a wrong. The company needs to really take a good hard look at who they are and what they want to be.
Elizabeth, as you were talking, I was reminded of the first exercise we did where we were talking about different kinds of collaboration that happen in different places. And as you're talking about the people and their preferences about where they work, I know I've worked with people who prefer to work at home and also prefer not to check in with their team, prefer not to speak to people, prefer not to be visible, and therefore created all the bad assumptions where we go, wait a second, does that person actually even work here? Really? Where it wasn't clear. So I believe with hybrid work policies, what an organization to enable those kinds of preferences must do is they must do collaboration training. Like if you're going to do this, people must understand how to work out loud. They must understand how to meet effectively, because all of those things are more difficult when we allow everybody's working preferences to exist at the same time. So there's a trade-off, right? If you say everybody has to be in the office, we don't have to train them how to talk to each other because they just run into each other.
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, you should train them how to talk to everybody.
Well, I remember reading research, I'm sure you know it too, at least, that if you're more than 50 yards away from a person, you might as well be in another city.
Right.
Or if you're on a different floor from somebody, you might as well be across the globe because you just don't see each other enough. And that there's this really weird way in which, like, distance, there's this incredible drop off in intimacy with physical location, and allowing that to persist unthinkingly feels to me like a competitive disadvantage.
Yeah, I remember all those studies and experiencing it when I used to work for Intel, which is a large company. It had a lot of different buildings and different floors and more than 80 feet of distance between people. But conversely, the team that was co-located had a ton of over-the-wall conversations, informal connections, and that, we were a strong team, sub-team. Let's say there were 15 to 20 people in cube land that were in a close physical proximity. And I think that actually benefited that team. And there were multiple teams that were like that. So it's interesting to think about what that implies.
I think I'm agreeing with Thomas about the assumption that because people are co-located, they're communicating, but actually they're sitting in their cubes and they're emailing each other. Because it seems simpler to think, oh, John's over there, I'll go and talk to him. I'll just email him and then he's got it. And it's off my plate and it's on his plate.
Well, yeah, I remember talking to a group about, people versus task people, introverts and extroverts, and task versus people orientation. It's like, okay, how can you tell the people oriented person who's more of a talker, a listener than a reader, writer? You send them an email, they print it, they walk over to your cube and say, so what's going on?
Yeah.
And you're like, I wrote to you.
Yeah.
They're not reading it.
Yeah, go away. Yeah.
Yeah, they want to talk.
Yeah.
And you can do that remotely, but there's a work style. And Drucker pointed out that if you're a reader, writer, or you're a talker, listener heavily, as some people are, you're never going to change. You can adapt it to remote, but it's not going to change. And that's something we all have to negotiate with each other.
And I think to Steve's point and also Thomas's point, more than ever, what I'm hearing is when people are coming back to the office, more than they used to before they went all virtual, they are sitting at their desk on Teams or writing emails because that's what they're used to doing, being alone, not completely undistracted when they're in the office. But I think that they're going to need to maybe not just relearn some ways to communicate, but I think office designs really have to accommodate more opportunities for serendipity as well. So I see a lot of cubicles going away to the extent that's possible within the office.
Which raises those, I can't hear, people are talking,
It's kind of blowing my mind thinking about this because, the artifact of an office is really built from an age. And if you think about the ages of industrialization and the early information age, how we group together, and are we actually at the cusp of a more interesting age where we really don't need to carry forward the tools of the previous era, and in doing so, it's sort of the dinosaur strategy, and that really there's a much more interesting evolution underway that we're in the middle of right now that we can't quite see it because we're in it. Is that actually what's happening? Is that the opportunity?
Yeah, completely agree, John. I'm having the conversations with companies who have now transitioned into things like MS Teams, and they've realized that MS Teams has got this whole load of stuff around teams and projects and timelines and chat and everything else. And you say, how are you using that? Oh, we've really got into that. And I say, okay, when did you switch email off? And they go, what? No, we're still using email. Oh, well, so you're using email internally and you're using Slack or Trello or Teams. How come? Because those things are platforms that we've invented recently to replace those technologies. So why on earth are you still using email? So I was thinking, so I mean, I do know it's a challenge, but it's kind of, it stimulates a debate as to say, yeah, we're just adding stuff here. We're not taking anything away. And then when you add in the millennials, who have had the last 10 years completely, totally immersed in social networking, without any sense of physical presence, they're completely used to communicating in, social networks, corporate social networks. They don't have a concept.
Many children don't use email.
They don't use email. The only reason my kids have got an email is because they need to sign up for the odd site.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I think too, what we are used to now is hybrid work is not the way to go. It's a band-aid solution that we devise quickly because we need to do something. Yes, something new is coming. As for office work, everybody has a different way of communicating. Communication, some people like the email, some people like a lengthy email, and they write, a novel every time they want to communicate something to you. Others, they want to walk over there and talk to you for 5 minutes because they get instant feedback, and this is how they work. It depends. And I think, yes, something new is coming, and I don't think it is what we are doing right now. We're sitting at home in front of a computer with the Zoom meetings and the emails and not, whatever else we are used to. There's a new generation who works totally different from, I'm dating myself here, but I'm used to it a certain way, and I can sit back and see what's coming in. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be good. Some of it not. We'll see.
I think that's pretty profound, actually. I think ending this conversation on these policies are hard and they're awful because it's not right. We haven't yet figured out what the real destination ought to be.
Mm-hmm.
And the real destination is not this, which is why we're having trouble deciding on it and implementing it, because it's not cool. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't look good. It's not fair. It's driving some people out of the workforce. It's driving weird costs, weird having to juggle for where your desk is or whether I park or do I come in and do I get daycare? Do I not? Like all of those things actually just don't make sense. Interesting. And yet.
And I have to say goodbye. I have to jump on another meeting.
Thank you.
It was nice to meet all of you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you. And I have to say goodbye as well. And actually, one of the massive benefits, it's 6:41 here in the UK. And I'm going to walk out of my office and be in the kitchen in roughly 90 seconds and cook dinner for my family, which doesn't require a 90-minute commute. So I'm very grateful for that. And I've got so used to it, I never want to go back to the office again.
All right. Thanks,
But
Steve.
thank you. All right.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.